Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the fourth and final session of this conference. أهلا وسهلا بكم في آخر ورابع وآخر إن شاء الله سيشن في الكونفرنس ده. وإحنا عايزين نشكر السادة المنظمين كلهم على رأسهم طبعا الهيئة العامة للرقابة المالية، وطبعا باشمهندس خالد وجميع الدكتور أحمد أنيس على أداء رائع بصراحة. يوم مشرف جدا ومؤتمر مشرف جدا، واعتقد ان احنا مش هنقدر نختم هذا المؤتمر غير لما نجيب خبراء العالميين على رأسهم السبيكرز ان شاء الله انا هقدمهم النهارده. Quick translation. I'm thanking good. So I'm just making sure that Jordan and Drew, you're listening to the translation in your ear. All right. والنهارده انا هقدم البانل ان شاء الله. عندنا التوبيك بتاع البانل النهارده هو the importance of the International Valuation Standards and practice and its impact on the industry and the economy, specifically in the context of the Egyptian real estate market. فأهمية المعايير العالمية وتطبيقاتها في السوق العقاري وتبعياته على الاقتصاد، خاصة في التطبيق في مصر. والنهارده طبعا احنا today we'll explore the critical role of the International Valuation Standards, the economic impact, and what it takes to ensure the successful implementation and compliance. والسادة الحضور النهارده Mr. Drew Dorweiler, and he's an MRICS fellow for RICS, and he is the chair of the members and standard recognition board of the International Valuations and Standard Council. هو الرئيس أو chair Standards Recognition Board, Standards and Members and Standard Recognition Board, which is he's a global expert in valuation, we're advocate of the harmonization of valuation and standards worldwide. Second panelist will be Mr. Jordan D'Gama, and he's an MRICS, and he's the head of strategic partnerships and at the RICS for the Middle East and Africa. And he's an experienced leader in building strong industry partnerships to promote professionalism and compliance with the RICS and IVS standards. And Saud Alquaifil Saud MRICS, board member of Claro, and one of the regional advisors of TAQEEM, Saudi Arabia, in its initiation. And he's a key player in shaping the valuation profession and promoting international standards in the region. And I guess he'll also be joining us to explain and to explore the Saudi experience and the kind of journey that they went through. I will first give 15 to 20 minute presentation to Mr. Drew. He'll talk about the IVSC, and we will come back for a panel discussion. Thank you. Mr. Drew, okay. Welcome. Welcome to Egypt for the first time.
It is.
And welcome to this conference. Thank you.
To thank the kind invitations of the Egyptian Society of Real Estate Appraisers, the Financial Regulatory Authority, as well as the Global Appraisal Tech Group, the Madany family, and the collaboration of MRICS. And so far I've really enjoyed Egypt. It's probably 48 hours since I've been here. I've also particularly enjoyed this conference. And a lot of what I've said, I'm gratified to hear that similar comments have been made all throughout the day. In particular, I appreciated the comments earlier this morning from Dr. Salah, the chairman of the FRA. And without further ado, I'll get into my presentation. So again, as Dr. Tarek mentioned, I'm the chair of the IVSC's Membership Standards and Recognition Board. And just a brief overview, for those of you who aren't very familiar with the IVSC, what we do. And it's really two basic things. It's one, establishing the IVS, the International Valuation Standards, which are common internationally followed group of standards for valuation professionals in all areas of valuation, whether it be real estate, business valuation, intangible assets, machinery and equipment, of securities commissions. And also academic members, which are a key component because academic members are those who are creating our curriculum to train our valuators. And again, more than 200 members worldwide. And on our boards at the IVSC, I'm about to show an organogram, but there are, the IVSC takes great pride in the fact that its board members comprise an international group of valuation experts from all disciplines, incredibly diverse, many different languages. And here's the organogram of really what we, of our boards. In particular, the Standards Review Board on the right. They're the ones that develop and update the IVS, the International Valuation Standards. Membership and Standards Recognition Board, I'll get into that in a minute. That's actually what I'm sharing, along with Dr. Tarek is a new member starting January 2025. So very proud to have you on the board. And there's the advisory forum, and that's pretty interesting because what the advisory forum does, it comprises members of there were members on the advisory forum representing different VPOs, and much of what they do, they act as thought leaders on emerging issues in valuation, whether it be valuing data, whether it be environmental, ESG, environmental, social, and governance aspects, the impact of that on valuation. Artificial intelligence, that's another topic that some of the advisory forum subcommittees are working on. And this is a bit of a dated slide. I apologize for that because there's a Europe committee and an Asia committee being based in Singapore, but there's a brand new Middle East and Africa committee, which is established in Riyadh with, again, the great help of TAQEEM. And International Valuation Standards. What I'd really like to point out here are two things. One, we've just updated the valuation standards as of a year ago, at the end of January 2024. They come into effect, the new standards, at the end of this month, January 2025, although you're able to feel free to use them. And they're pretty significant updates. They've been significantly expanded. And I'm pleased to also announce for the first time that they will be available for free. Before you had to pay for them. So, which makes perfect sense in our effort to try to get as many users to adhere to the IVS. Now they're free. So there's no excuse. And again, I won't go through all of this, but the key part is the bottom row, where the blue, that's basically assets. It comprises business valuation, intangibles, financial instruments such as derivatives and complex stock options. Also, the green is probably most interest to members here. The real property, plant, equipment, and infrastructure, and then again, financial instruments. And what does my committee do? The Membership Standards and Recognition Committee. Pretty much touched on it before, but one thing is we're trying to encourage existing valuation professional organizations who are members of IVSC to utilize International Valuation Standards. And it's simple, but I gotta say it. Standards, it's an agreed upon way of doing something. And during my about 40 years in the valuation profession, I've seen it happily evolve from a very fragmented, different countries and different regions, utilizing different standards and methodologies. Now with IVS, the world is integrating, it's becoming more harmonious in terms of utilization of standards. I often liken it to, I think everyone's familiar with IFRS in the accounting world. IVS, it's really the same thing. IFRS in the 80s and 90s again, it was a world where you look at financial statements, different reporting, physical reporting, it just looked different. You don't know, what certain terms mean. Like, had different meanings in different countries. It's the same thing in the valuation world. We're harmonizing the valuation standards. And another important thing, and it's a particular pet project of mine, our committee, is we're developing the valuation profession in regions of the world where it's either nascent, it's emerging, or it doesn't exist at all. And I can go into that. I won't go into great detail here, although I'm happy to chat the rest of the day about some of our case studies, what we've done. But just members of our MSRC, of our board, in the last 2 years, we've established valuation profession organizations in Burkina Faso, as well as in Uganda. And Uganda was particularly interesting because our board members, including the CEO of the IVSC, spent a lot of time face-to-face with government leaders in Uganda, and they're making IVS obligatory for any valuation professional in that country. And again, what's particularly important in terms of our committee, but also how standards, how the valuation profession can be broken down in any jurisdiction, in particular here in Egypt. One, what valuation standards do we use? Secondly, how is the profession regulated? Third, how are valuers licensed? And finally, qualifications, either to become a valuer, or once you're a designated valuer, what's your ongoing professional development look like? And I'll hit each one of these categories briefly. So again, the first, the IVS, that's why I'm here, is to preach the benefits of IVS. And in Egypt, this is something that's obviously used. We're great. I'm really pleased to hear, as I said earlier, how various speakers on this platform have recognized the importance of using IVS in your valuations. I know there's also Egyptian valuation standards, and we see that a lot. That's we certainly don't want to compete with local valuation standards in any country. However, again, that might be very practicable in any country to use on a local basis, but again, with increased globalization in the world, you really need to think about using IVS.
So Jordan, if so now you know Drew, Jordan is the strategic partnership head of strategic partnerships for the RICS Middle East and Africa. And Bashman Saud is one of the founders of Claro, and also one of the original and one of the trusted advisors in the initial startups of TAQEEM in Saudi. And one of the compelling reasons why in Saudi, and followed that with Bahrain, and today Oman and Qatar and Kuwait and other countries, are compelled to do so because they got stunned, they got surprised when they understood the relationship between transparency and standards and foreign direct investment in their countries. So we've heard today all over that it is important in order for Egypt to export real estate, تصدير العقار والاستثمار العقاري من قبل المستثمرين الأجانب, or basically بيع أصول الدولة, selling the assets, the government assets and so forth, and encouraging investors to put their money in Egypt. We understand that today they understood the challenges of that revolving around the issue of trust and transparency in the economy, and the reporting, their financial reporting, valuation reporting, etc., or even measurements. We spoke today about, for example, IPMS, International Property Measurement Standard, being an issue. حتى في مصر we say المتر بتاعك كم سنتي. يعني everyone knows that the meter is 100 centimeters. Why is it in Egypt that a meter is 70 centimeters, sometimes 80 centimeters? وحدة التحميل. two apartments شقتين 200 متر مش نفس الناس. تقدر to go and buy سيراميك أو موكيت للشقة دي مختلفة عن الشقة دي. This is why we're here today. We wanted to push that idea further and close the conference with it. And I had a few questions. If it's okay, I will start with perhaps Jordan. Maybe you can reflect on sort of some of those challenges since you have a lot of experience and I've witnessed your journey implementing those challenges, including all the resistance that you faced in places like Bahrain as a case study. Perhaps how is it going to be going forward with the rest of the countries?
So yeah, just as Tarek mentioned, I'll just give you a little bit about my background. So I'm an RSS chartered surveyor. I qualified in the UK probably about 15, 16 years ago now, so getting older and greyer as time moves on. And I moved to the Middle East about 12 years ago and started out in property valuation. So I valued a lot of assets, particularly in Dubai. And then around sort of 7 years ago, I was looking for a bit of a change, and I joined the RSS. And for those of you that don't know who the RSS are, the Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors. And we cover everything really to do with the built and natural environment, and valuation being one of those areas. We predominantly look at property valuation, although we do cover plant and machinery as well. And we work very, very closely with the International Valuation Standards Council. In fact, the relationship is so good that every time there is an update to the IVSC standard, we update our own Red Book standard. And if there's any confusion in the room as to why we have the two standards, the way that I look at it is IVSC sort of mandate what you should be doing as a valuer, whether it be business assets or property assets or anything beyond that. And what the RSS do is interpret those standards as almost like a practical how-to guide. How do you implement it in reality? What should be included in an evaluation report? What should be included in the terms of engagement that you have with your client, etc., etc. So we do work very, very, very closely together. I'm sorry, I've forgotten actually what your initial question was. I was just slowing.
That's okay. So basically, I also wanted thank you for the introduction. I wanted to also sort of explore, because the intention of this conference is to sort of take Egypt a leap forward. We want to catch up with the rest of the world. We want to become at the top of the ranks. So, and instead of actually making up our own story, well, before we do it, we have a story, but I mean, why don't we look at case studies around us and learn from the mistakes as well, so we don't fall into them?
Yeah, so like I said, I've been with the RSS for about 7 years, and during my time there, I've had a lot of conversations with governments, particularly around the Middle East region. I work quite closely with certain governments on the adoption of international standards. Now, it may well have been the case that they had their own standards, and maybe they were working really well in a particular country, but the need to attract foreign direct investment in particular meant that they wanted to go that initial step and start to consider the international standards. So one project I was quite heavily involved in was one in Bahrain. And what we had conversations with the government. It was all around attracting this foreign direct investment because they created so many properties and built so many assets, and they were struggling to fill them, really, to be honest with you. So they had all these vacant units. So we looked at that, we looked at the banking system, we looked at the valuation profession, and actually to a point that Drew mentioned earlier, there was really no rules, regulations in place around valuation. So we identified that as an issue. Obviously that's not the case in Egypt. And so we worked with the government over time to create something called the Bahrain Valuation Standards. And in essence, what there were sort of 3 chapters to that particular standard. Chapter 1, if you like, was a verbatim copy of the International Valuation Standards. Chapter 2 was a verbatim copy of the RSS Red Book, so the how-to guide. And Chapter C was anything relating to local law in Bahrain, anything that was really important to that country. And it could be something around compulsory purchase, it could be around inheritance law, so anything like that. And what we did is we looked at that, we included it in the standard and made deviations from international standards where applicable. And then once that standard was created, it was mandated as law into Bahrain. And then we went through a process of qualifying individuals to operate within a particular licensing category. So for example, if you've been a valuer in Bahrain for the last 20, 30 years, you could come in at any license level, that wasn't a problem, as long as you were technically competent to do so. If you weren't, there was training and assessments put in place for you to take. Now again, that might not be needed here, I'm just giving an idea of what we did. So that actually brought Bahrain up in that JLL Transparency Index. Granted, still not quite where it should be, it could go a lot higher, but it was a good start, and it got them onto the index and moving up the transparency global profile.
Thank you so much, Jordan. And speaking about, so that was the success Bahrain story. I think TAQEEM in Saudi Arabia has also a very similar trajectory, that they already realized. So TAQEEM, if you remind me, it follows the IVSC to the letter in terms of valuation. Yeah, so I'll let you talk about this experience.
Without me, I will speak in Arabic.
That's fine, yeah. Do you have the translation?
المعذرة بالصوتي تعبان شوي بس إن شاء الله الصوت يصير واضح. أنا بحكي لكم قصة تقييم البداية. بعد الأزمة المالية في عام 2008 الحكومة السعودية راجعت كثير من الأنظمة والقوانين المتعلقة بالقطاع المالي وبما فيها القطاع العقاري، وأصدرت مجموعة من الأنظمة والقوانين اللي لها علاقة بالاستثمار العقاري. نزلت قانون نظام الرهن العقاري، نظام الصناديق العقارية، ونظام التقييم العقاري أو التقييم عموما. هذا طلع في 2012. 2013 تم إنشاء الهيئة السعودية للمقيمين المعتمدين، وأنا تشرفت إني ساعدت الهيئة من بدايتها في إنشاء الهيئة وأنظمتها وترتيبها. كان أول مشروع عملناه هو دراسة أفضل الممارسات عالميا، وعملناها مع شركات استشارية، وأخذنا لفينا ICS, IVSC, Appraisal Institute وكذا، يعني منظمة دولية خاصة بالتقييم العقاري على مستوى العالم. بعد كده راجعنا التجارب القريبة منا وبما يخص المعايير وترتيبها. فكان فيه السؤال: هل نعمل معايير سعودية للتقييم؟ كيف نعملها وشلون نعملها؟ كانت الإجابة أن لعمل معايير سعودية تحتاج إلى جهد كبير جدا وناس مختصين وعندهم مهارات عالية، وقد تأخذ وقت طويل. في أثناء ذاك الوقت تكلمنا مع الهيئة السعودية للمحاسبين وهم بادين قبلنا ب 30 سنة، وكان آخر شيء توصلوا له إنهم وقفوا المعايير السعودية للمحاسبة واتبعوا المعايير الدولية IVSC. فاحنا قلنا ليش نسوي نفس التجربة؟ على طول المعايير السعودية هي المعايير الدولية، ففعليا ما في معايير سعودية، هي اللهم انها ترجمة للمعايير الدولية بالعربي. فالمعايير المتبعة في السعودية هي المعايير الدولية. اليوم نزل المعايير 2025 وبدأت الآن في السعودية مع تقييم. أتوقع يعني في بداية الهيئة كان في خطوتين جدا مهمة: اعتماد المعايير انها تصير المعايير الدولية، ان الدخول للمهنة ما يقتصر على المهندسين، اي احد ممكن يدخل فيها. هذه النقطتين كانت مهمة وإنجاز في السعودية.
Thank you.
Can I just say one thing as well? And this will probably make you chuckle because it'll go back to my old boss's days. Quite often when we do these talks around the globe, people always say, well, we have our own standards, and that could be Kathmandu or Cardiff, it doesn't really matter. Why the international standards and the record guides so important when we have our own. And my old boss always used to give a football analogy. So everybody likes football, right? Well, most people, I actually don't, but most people like football. Big up Mo Salah. You can play football all over the world, right? Egypt can have one set of football rules. The UAE could have another set of football rules, UK could have another set of football rules. Would it make football any less popular? No, probably not, because everybody enjoys the sport and you can continue doing it. However, could you have a World Cup? No, probably not, because Egypt's rules would clash with UAE's rules, and UAE's rules would clash with UK's rules. So when you start thinking about something on a global level, whether it's football or valuation, if you can have a set of standards that internationally people can look at, interpret and understand to a certain degree, it makes for a better economy, a better society, because you're all working towards the same thing. So I just thought I'd chuck that one in.
Thank you for that. And actually, to that effect, if we're talking about valuation, it's noteworthy to mention that a member, a fellow of TAQEEM, actually there's a relationship or a reciprocation between, say, the RICS license, for example, and TAQEEM, because now we're playing with the international laws, right? So the RICS would have not given the license to fellow TAQEEM if it weren't that the actual rigor of training and qualification in Saudi Arabia was to the standards that the RICS International Committee accepts. And I wanted to mention this point because the issue of recognition, once you play on this world field, if you're a player in any of the teams in Saudi or the UK or the world or anywhere, now you can play on an international scale and get recognized. And back to Drew, I guess, on this level. So in terms of, you've gone around the world and you've seen how the IVSC, from its inception to today, and you can see you're forming the World League of Valuers here. So do you think, what would it take for Egyptians, for the Egyptian market? Because we do have valuation standards, we do have trained professionals, but we're not getting the recognition from the world that we are worthwhile being used as valuation experts. Unfortunately, similar to our driving license not being accepted, anywhere else in the world. So what does it take? What would it take us to get to that level?
Yeah. Well, again, I think that what it would take is adopting a set of standards that they're uniformly recognized and understood across the world. And I don't even want to pick on Egypt. I live in Canada. A number of years ago, Canada, and like Egypt, I mean, we have our own standards. They function just fine, but they're quite unique. They're very different than even next door in the US, let alone other parts of the world, Middle East, Europe, et cetera, et cetera. So what we did in 2020 is we discussed, the leaders at the CBV Institute of Canada discussed with IVSC the possible of harmonizing standards. So what we do have now in effect is you can follow the Canadian standards, and that's suggested for Canada. But if you're dealing with international valuation subject matter, or even Canadian targets of the valuation, that the valuation is really intended for global use, it's strongly suggested that we should use the IVS. And in fact, there's a reciprocity exam that we can take. I've taken it. It's really not difficult, and it wouldn't take much to implement that here. That you then obtain a certificate, a designation that you're trained and certified in IVS.
Thank you for that. Do we have time to open up the floor for questions to take from the audience? Yes? Do we have another mic? Is it working? Oh, yes, please, go ahead.
بس رجوعا للمعايير اليوم لو كل دولة عندها معايير خاصة فيها حتى لو متوافقة مع المعايير الدولية بيصير من الصعب كل ما يصير تحديث أو تغير في الأسواق إن كل دولة يصير لها يعني تحديد مناسب لها. يعني اليوم في المعايير الدولية 2025 يتكلم المعيار 105 عن استخدام النمذجة في التقييم والتقييم الآلي.
This is automated.
يعني المنظمات العالمية ولا كل دولة بتعمل تحديث وعندها آراء معينة يصير من الصعب أنها يعني تجذب المختصين اللي يناقشون الأوضاع الجديدة والطارئة. اليوم التقنية داخلة بقوة، الذكاء الاصطناعي، نمذجة التقييم والمستقبل لها. اليوم الجهد اللي يبذل في المعايير مفروض انه يصرف الى تأهيل، الى توعية، الى تطوير. في المعايير الدولية يعني كافية ونافعة انها تستخدم في اي مكان، وهي مكتوبة بطريقة تستخدم في اي مكان، وكمان صالحة لأي دولة للتطبيق.
موضوع مهم. يعني this is a very important topic, which is the energy and time that we spend should be spent on qualification, continuous professional development, not in reinventing the wheel, and not reinventing the rules of engaging with the world.
I just wanted to mention one other thing as well, because I've heard measurement mentioned quite a lot today by various different people and how it can deviate so much. And again, just like the International Valuation Standards, there are the International Property Measurement Standards, which are globally known as well, because the way people, I mean, everybody will know this, but the way you measure an office building in India is different to the way you measure it in France. One thing that we've been quite successful at doing, particularly in Dubai, for anybody that owns a property in Dubai, when you buy a property in Dubai, you get given a government title deed from the lands department. That has a measurement on there that was undertaken by the lands department or their civil engineering department. What we've been quite successful in doing is aligning that to IPMS, So actually the title deed now has two numbers on it. It has the one measured by the civil engineering department in Dubai, but it also benchmarks to the International Property Measurement Standards, which then links in with the International Valuation Standards and the Red Book. So again, if you're an international investor, foreign direct investor, you kind of know what you're getting size-wise as well. So that might be something, again, that can be considered in the future.
I agree. I think Dr. Mohammed Farid, the head of the FRA, was alluding to this in his opening remarks, is that we need to have sort of a unified measurement standard, and I guess your recommendation would be that it would actually be the IPMS, so that actually even foreign direct investors can benefit, understand the only measurement standard that we should be applying in Egypt in reflection to their property and investments. Thank you for that. So I guess, so you can see the synergies between the IVS, the RICS, and TAQEEM is because we're playing now with the same rules on the national playfield, that there is reciprocation, understanding across the nations, across the borders, and that sort of allows investments to travel borders and to have more transparency and more trust in the industry, and reduces risk, right? People doing in Egypt, at the moment that we do work in Egypt right now, foreign direct investors have to associate a lot of risk. Therefore, it excludes a lot of possible investors that are willing to put investments at a lower risk in a country like ours, and they would rather go to safer markets. Do we have time to put some Q&A? Open the floor? Only 10 minutes left. All right, I'll take exactly, if it's okay, 3 questions from the floor, because I know everyone's hungry and we have to leave. All right. Dr. Ibrahim is the first to raise his hand. Go ahead. Can't hear you. Just a minute.
Thank you.
ممكن تعالوا صوت المايك معلش؟ تفضل. لا خلاص علاه. تفضل.
Okay now?
Yes.
Hi Jordan. Hi Joe. I think Jordan, we had together a good experience in Bahrain when we trained together there and we started the system. Give us and the audience brief idea about your experience and experience also about DERA and the classification system and the training system there in 5 minutes, please. This will help us a lot in Egypt to take idea about what is going on around us.
Okay, so the good thing with RERA was when the standards were created, it was mandated as law. The problem that we had in Bahrain was there were valuers that had been undertaking valuations for long periods of time that really didn't have any qualifications because there was no qualification system there, nothing, zero. So what we did is we created a tiered licensing model, and there were some assessments that people could take to categorize them essentially into a particular license. So if the bread and butter of somebody's work was doing residential apartment villa valuations using a comparable method, they would get a license at tier D. They could move up to a tier A license and undertake valuations of a mixed-use development or a hotel, but they have to prove their technical competence to be able to do it. And there were sort of 4 levels. So at the bottom, it was bread and butter comparable, and we started looking at the next license level up was investment valuations, so residential or commercial towers essentially. That have rental income coming in. And then I think the layer above that, we started to look at mixed-use developments, development appraisals, residual valuations, and then the top level was really profits methods. So it got progressively more difficult, I suppose, as you went up. But the framework that we created had an assessment to it. And if somebody wasn't technically competent, there was a a module or a period of training that somebody could undertake to take them to the next level. So it was essentially a tiered licensing model based on technical competence.
So that's, thank you for that. So Dr. Muhammad Faid as well was talking about this tiered system in his opening remarks. And he's also talked about it from the perspective of competencies or maharat muayyana. Because obviously not everyone starting at the bottom has all the essential competencies to be able to value, let's say, a very complex property like a hotel from the get-go. Yeah.
And they might not want to go all the way. I mean, if the majority of the work that I undertook was on villas and apartments, and I was happy with a Class D license or a Class A, or you can call it whatever you want to call it. If that's your bread and butter, you might never want to value a very complex mixed-use asset, and you can stay there for the rest of your life. However, if you do want to do that, maybe there aren't very many valuers that are valuing these complex assets, and actually if you want to go and do it and capitalise on that, you have the opportunity to do it as well. So,
Thank you. Do we have another question that we can take? Dr. Ahmed Anis?
Okay. Yeah.
Can you also ask Dr. Ahmed, can you choose who you want to direct the question to?
Yes. Yes, I want to direct my question to you. And you may correct me if I understood what you mentioned on the Canadian model. I understood from you that the Canadian model works as long as the valuation is done inside the territories of Canada. You're using the local Canadian standards. And if it is evaluation for international use, we're using IVS. Provided that there is no conflict between the Canadian model and the IVS. Is that what you recommend?
Well, a key point to point out is that it's voluntary. So you can use either set of standards completely or discretion, but the guidance that the Institute offers is they're saying that in particular, if it is either for an international audience or it's an international asset, that you should strongly consider using IVS. It's not a requirement, just a suggestion.
What is the common practice now?
I'm sorry?
Canadians do.
What actually occurs? More and more people are using IVS because, again, as I mentioned, you have to take a brief course and pass an exam to show that you're qualified, to demonstrate you're qualified in IVS. And as more and more people since 2020 have been taking that, we're seeing more adoption of IVS.
Canadian standards are still valid and they have used.
Sorry?
Canadian standards are still valued.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. But they're very different than IVS, let's put it that way. Different
in conflict or just being different?
They're different. It's different definitions even for some of the fundamental terms. Methodologies are probably about 95% the same.
Okay.
But it's really...
I remember in 1916, I think, there was a joint committee between the USPAP and the RPS to compare the differences between the two, and they ended up saying that there's no real difference, although they're looking different, or the texts are different, but in value and actual practice, both are leading to the same results.
Yeah, I was actually, it's funny you mentioned that. I was on the board of trustees of the Appraisal Foundation when that was being discussed. They did both USPAP, well, the Appraisal Foundation, and IVS. They'd issued they called it a bridge document illustrating the differences, and you're absolutely right. The differences are minimal. It was more stylistic, contents of the report, that sort of thing. However, the Canadian standards are a bit different than the US ones, and they're different than IVS. In fact, we're trying to, for quite a long time, we've been trying to establish a similar bridge document between US and Canadian standards, and it's just not happening.
So For the ASA though, the Appraisal Institute, it's getting closer to the IVS, they're fully almost,
Yes.
yeah, it's almost full adoption of
Yes, yeah, that's probably about 90% similar.
كان دكتور احمد تمام سؤال حضرتك طيب باشمهندس سمارة اخر سؤال معلش مهندس سمارة
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you very much for this discussion, and appreciate your time and commitment. I'll ask for IVS. How can IVS contribute to improve transparency and reduce the risk in global market real estate? How can it do it?
And also Mhandisa Marwa comes from Sudan and she does valuations in south of our border, and obviously they have economic. Yes, and she's also trying to become, she does valuations in accordance with the IVS and the RICS standards, but she's also suffering. She came to us in the board, and she came to us with the RICS Middle East and Africa, and she wants to be a champion of these standards adoption in Sudan as well. So I guess the issue with risk, can you clarify a bit the question on what kind of risk are you, because I understand what you mean, but can you clarify for the audience what kind of risk that you're referring to?
Yes, risk in contribute to transparency and reduce risk real estate. How IVS standard reduce risk.
Okay, so that qualification and regulation and all that.
Somebody, you guys. Yeah.
So I think by nature of just adopting a standard or writing reports in accordance with an international standard, you're automatically helping to reduce risk and become more transparent, because you wouldn't tell your clients which standard you're adhering to. So that would probably be.
Yeah, but I guess adopting the standard without sort of what Drew was alluding to, which is without proper qualification, regulation, there has to be a regulatory sort of authority that reviews and regulates the output of a valuer. And this is why there's sort of an RICS, IVS thing, because in countries where there's no local or absence of local authority, international investors can take comfort in hiring an MRICS that's in a specific country, because at least they know that these guys are qualified and they follow the IVS standard, and they get regulated by the RICS review, and they are questioned by the RICS regulatory department or division. So I guess the issue is, does the IVSC have its own ability to regulate members or to make sure in the employment or deployment of the IVS that there are similar measures, or just it's concerned just with the standards?
Yeah. Well, for one thing, just to be clear, IVSC, we do not offer our own designation. There's not an IVSC after your name. We simply issue the standards, and we encourage development of the profession. But that being said, and again, specifically, that's what my committee at the IVSC does, is we reach out to countries like yours, and I'd love to discuss that. I'd love to discuss that with you afterwards, but currently we're looking at, as I mentioned, we've just established valuation profession organizations in Burkina Faso, in Uganda. We're looking to do so in Ethiopia, and in Angola, and where they don't exist now. And it's one thing establishing an organization, that's easy, that's the easy part. The harder part is establishing a curriculum, people to actually offer aspiring valuation professionals the necessary training to become valuers whose experience and methodology is accepted globally. And the final key to that is that's very important, because again, in a country, say we'll take yours, or many countries. Say there's an international, a bank, they want to lend to someone in that country. There's an investor that wants to invest in that country. So they're looking at an asset, a piece of real estate. They're like, okay, well here's the value, but who did it? How did they get to the number? What standards did they follow? And if that's not transparent, they might pass on that investment or that loan.
Thank you, everyone. I think you have any more other final comments that you want to add? I mean, one thing, Jordan?
Not really a final comment. I just want to say a big thank you to the organisers for today, for inviting us along. It's been lovely listening to all the talks today, meeting all the people that we've met. So yeah, just from myself and the RSS, yeah, just a big thank you.
Thank you all, and I'd like to thank my guests and the organizers.